Well, again, thank you all for joining us. We're glad to have you with us. Folks, I come to this call with a pretty heavy heart because I am by nature an optimist. I believe in God. I believe in this great country of ours. I believe that it's a special and exceptional nation, and that we are all blessed to be part of it, to be citizens in it. But for the first time, I find myself feeling that we are really losing the battle to save this nation. And I'm not about to quit, but I'll tell you something. It does not look good because the people have expressed their will again and again, and through judicial and executive action, the will of the people is subverted, and these forces of evil, frankly, go on and do what they want to do. So I'm hoping that the three guests who are sharing with us today are going to help disabuse me of any pessimism in all of us, and hope that we will go away from this call with a sense of what we can do to not only slow down but to reverse the horrible direction that so many are leading this country. So let's start. We do have Delegate Bob Marshall. I asked him to join us because Delegate Marshall is the person who is essential, primarily responsible for the marriage amendment in Virginia. In fact, the technical name of the marriage amendment is the Marshall-Newman Amendment. It was named after him. He is a premier legislator here in Virginia. I think that everybody, whether they agree with Bob Marshall or not, and by the way, I agree with him, but whether they agree with him or not, would all say Bob Marshall is a man of conviction, of principle, of integrity. He is a man of unwavering commitment and courage, and he can always be relied upon to work out and walk out the things that he proclaims he believes in. And so I'm really honored to call him a friend and a colleague here in Virginia. Delegate Marshall, thanks so much for joining us. Please take the next 7 to 10 minutes and share with us, and then we'll try to get a couple of questions in.
Well, Bishop Jackson, thank you very much for that introduction. And I was going to say, if you were Catholic, you might have to go to confession. But other than that, let me place this in the circumstance that we are. In 2006, the voters of Virginia approved by about almost 58%, the Marshall-Newman Marriage Amendment. It was very clear, and I did this as a consequence of the actions of the Supreme Court in Lawrence v. Texas, which struck down all the sodomy laws in 2003. In 2004, I prepared the ground by getting a law passed over Mark Moore's objections that we're not going to recognize out-of-state civil unions, which is a proxy or stalking horse for, if you pass such a law, the homosexual litigants will go into court and claim you're not getting equal protection, so you can't allow any camel's nose under the tent. In 2005, the first passage of the constitutional amendment was effected in, in the Virginia Constitution. You have to have a measure passed twice in identical form, and then it goes, there must be an intervening election of the General Assembly, and then it goes on the ballot the next year if it's passed again. Well, Governor Kane did not sign the bill, putting it on the ballot. He could have vetoed it, but he didn't do it. So he because he took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, implicitly he accepted its constitutionality. Mark Herring, the traitor on the matter here, Attorney General, voted for the amendment and to put it on the ballot. So he's on both sides of this question. What happened, he switched sides after Attorney General Cuccinelli filed the case to this challenge in Norfolk Court, which is being taken by a guy named Ted Olson, who used to be Solicitor General under Bush. He's being funded by a billionaire hedge fund guy named Paul Singer. This litigation proceeded in the wake of the successful efforts of Olson in California to use the 14th Amendment, so-called equal protection, to justify this. But at the time of the ratification of the 14th Amendment, 1868, all but 5 states made sodomy a felony. In 1776, every colony had sodomy as a common law felony. In 1960, every state had sodomy as a felony. The case which he pushed, it came down when an Obama appointee judge from Norfolk, issued a ruling several days ago. Her ruling was so pathetic. It was like late last Thursday night. I've never seen rulings this late. I guess it's legal to do it, but it's very awkward. The height of a snowstorm. She began the ruling quoting the Declaration of Independence about all men being equal, but attributing those words to the Constitution. She is incompetent to agree that I do not find sufficient words to explain. So she claims to have read the Loving versus Virginia decision, and that's an emotional pitch right there. But if you actually read the Loving v. Virginia decision, which said that you cannot ban marriage between persons of different races, it assumes, in the end of the decision, Justice Earl Warren gave it, says marriage is a fundamental right to which we owe our existence. Now, obviously, that means a man and a woman, because when a man and a man join physically, not very nice, but there's no issue. When a woman and a woman join physically, again, no issue. So the decision assumed marriage between a man and a woman, and only a man and a woman. Additionally, what has been overlooked here is that when there was litigation in the late 1900s, 1890s, and so on, with the admission of Utah territory as a state, that being controlled by the heavy presence of Mormon persons out there, the practice of polygamy was an impediment. And in court cases where the discussion came up as to whether Utah could enter the Union, the territorial law, which was passed by Congress, forbade polygamy and said you're not going to become a state. I'm shortening a whole bunch of things here. You're not going to be a state if you have polygamy. And the court sustained that. So the assumption was marriage is only between a man and a woman and not one man and three women. So, you know, that was done right there. And moreover, Congress required as a condition for entrance into the Union of a number of the territories of Western states that they put in their constitutions express reference to a ban on polygamy. And if you look at the constitutions of a number of the Western states, that ban is still in those constitutions. We have this decision coming down in which this judge presumptively decided that she had more constitutional weight, importance, and merit than the voters, 1.33 million voters in Virginia. This is a supreme act of hubris, but because of the litigation through the court, because of the false assumption of judicial supremacy, which was never in the Constitution, that is kind of sticking as a case, and we are made to be cast into bigots. She basically psychoanalyzed the entire population. You put us all on the couch and said anybody who was for this was animated by hate. This trick was first used in a decision of the Supreme Court out of Colorado invalidating a referendum out there when Justice Kennedy announced, like he's infallible, that everybody who was for this was motivated by hate, which is a kind of what they do, they take the definition of virtues and vices that Christians and Orthodox Jews would understand, and they kind of reverse them. Hatred is not a good thing, although you hate the sin and love the sinner, but this is being used against us. And in the Lawrence case, the claim was made you can't rely upon traditional morality in any sense to be the foundation or ground of any criminal statute. Although they're using it against us, this so-called opposition that's motivated by hate, how they can know this, it's not simply possible. When she issued this decision, I pointed out that it was so broad, she did not link, or she did not limit in any way marriage simply between two persons. Moreover, it is false to claim that homosexuals were denied the ability to marry. Judy Garland's fourth husband was a homosexual. It lasted 6 months. That poor lady, she was pushed into an abortion early on and never overcame it and just led a life of despair after that. Also, by equating race with sex, I mean, when you ask a question in school, what gender is Sally? Someone says Caucasian. This is a mental disconnect. I mean, how people get this far is simply beyond me. And to equate the segregationist practices in Virginia that that were applied against Americans of African descent with separate water fountains and restaurants and hotels, schools. I never saw a water fountain says, not for LGBTs. It wasn't there. So she cannot really do this. I also mentioned that how does homosexual activity is a predicate for so-called same-sex marriage, but it disqualifies such participants from donating blood. I said that she said she has pretensions to be more knowledgeable about marriage than Moses and Christ. This is going to be a problem because in the public mind, the only thing that's going on here is two guys are getting together and they call themselves married. It doesn't end there because she says this is a civil right. If this is sustained on these grounds, and in the Windsor case last year dealing with DOMA, they did not sustain it or strike down the federal part of the federal law based on the 14th Amendment. But she now is asserting this cute argument. What this means is, since we do not grant like tax-exempt status to the Ku Klux Klan or Nazi parties or any such white supremacist group, we cannot grant tax status to a church. It's gone. And in the states of Massachusetts, the District of Columbia, and Illinois, where the same-sex marriage litigations were pushed to their logical end, the religious adoption agencies were shut down. They could not work anymore. So this will not stop there. You will have, GLBT sensitivity training in employment. You will have conditions on contracts. You will have this being taught in the elementary schools, and the people who don't like it will be ostracized, categorized, and humiliated in front of everybody as bigots. This is an attempt to force this amoral, immoral ethic on the rest of us, and I suggest to you it is because the individuals with the homosexual effort view us as oppressors, and so therefore this is simply just punishment in their minds. It's all reversed, of course, from the gospel and the Ten Commandments, but that's what's going on.
Marshall. Let me, if I may, please. I know you've got, believe me, I know you could go on because of your wealth of knowledge about this. Let me open it up for calls, and just as I do that, because we don't have anybody in queue yet, folks, if you want to ask Delegate Marshall a question, press *6. That's *6. And in fact, want to get in queue to ask any of these folks because they're all experts on this from various angles, frankly. Feel free to get in queue now. And so the queue is filling up. Delegate Marshall, I'm only going to ask you to stay like another 3 or 4 minutes to take a couple of questions, and then we'll go to our next guest.
Okay.
So Daniel, let's go ahead and start taking questions.
All righty. We'll take question first from the phone number ending in 725-2154.
Okay, this is John Thomas calling. I'm the head of the New Jersey Coalition to Preserve and Protect Marriage. I'd like to ask Delegate Marshall the following. Where does the case go now? In other words, it's a district court decision. How is it being appealed, and by whom in the state legislature getting involved at all? And number two, is there any movement for a bill of impeachment in the United States Congress?
The case here, let me back up a second. The case will be appealed to the Fourth Circuit in Richmond. Right now, there's no direct representation of the Commonwealth in the court. You've got Michelle McQuigg, who is a clerk of court in Prince William County, where I live, being represented by Alliance Defending Freedom. And it's very peculiar where the Commonwealth is not directly represented. So you had Herring come in here, reverse himself. It's like he was in the huddle for the Dallas Cowboys, and then he switches and go over to the Washington Redskins. You can't do that. Canada's professional ethics reject that. Yesterday, I sent out an email alert around Virginia, and I gave a short summary of what's going on, and then I gave my longer statement, and I asked people to call their own congressman and ask them for articles of impeachment, and also to call Congressman Bob Goodlatte. I had a lady call me from Norfolk who said, Delegate Marshall, I did the first call, but every time I called Congressman Goodlatte's office, I got the following message. Congressman Goodlatte is not accepting any more calls. So obviously, the circuits were overloaded up there. This woman was very annoyed. She said, I pay his salary. He works for me. I do not like the fact that I cannot even reach him. I'm going to do an additional event here because the canons of professional ethics for the judges require that they be competent. When you got a woman who says the Declaration of Independence is the Constitution, prima facie, she's not competent. So I'm going after her on that. I was just working on an amendment with Legislative Services that on Thursday we're going to have 2 budget bills up. I'm going to amend both budget bills to say no money in this budget through June 30th, and then the second bill goes after that for 2 years. May be used by Mark Herring to prosecute this case, or in any way have any involvement. The second part of the amendment is going to name the Speaker of the House as the person who's designated to find competent counsel to defend the marriage amendment. I am working on two other approaches. One of which is to get a mandamus writ, which goes to the Virginia Supreme Court, which compels them to examine how any attorney who is an officer of the court is claiming to act under the authority that he does. I'm short-circuiting everything, but I have a lawyer drawing that up for me. We're going further than that, but you can't get too far ahead of the public opinion, or the screamers will. Yes.
Okay, Daniel, we just seem to have dropped all of our questioners.
Yeah, sorry about that. Hit a button accidentally. Yeah, if you want to ask a question, just hit *6. It'll put you back in the queue, and we'll get right to you. Okay, next question is from...
Wait, Delegate Marshall, and look, out of respect for our other guests, we're going to have to let you go and give them an opportunity to be heard. Now, if people want to support what you're doing or get in touch with you, what do you want them to do? Did I lose Delegate Marshall?
Let me see. Oh. Delegate Marshall, are you back with us, sir?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
We've got to let you go, Delegate. But would you tell people how to get in touch with you?
Send me an email to delegatebob@gmail.com.
Delegatebob@gmail.com.
That's it.
Because I know people probably want to talk to you and explore this with you. So thank you so much, though, for taking the time. You and I need to talk again because I want to support what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, folks, our next guest is the president of the Virginia Family Foundation. I have worked closely with her. Again, another great leader here in Virginia who is standing up for the values that we all hold dear, Victoria Cobb. Victoria, the floor is yours. Can I ask you to do like 7 minutes and then take some questions?
Yeah, and I may not even need that amount of time. I think Delegate Marshall covered at least the background on the marriage amendment very well and how we got to where we are. I think it's important to sort of talk through not just the policy side of this, but the grassroots side of this. What is it we can do? And also just in terms of what are the bullets, what are the talking points when we talk to our friends and our neighbors? Because honestly, the reason that, the narrative that the media is writing is this is a fait accompli, same-sex marriage will be law of the land, and all of your friends and neighbors support it anyway, so you're just a crazy, irrational bigot. And that's the narrative. And the way to counter that narrative is that we are productive in our networks, in our small circles, being defenders of the institution of marriage in a way that can help people put some words behind what they gut feel, but don't necessarily always have the words to say. And so, I just want to share with folks a little bit about some of the things that we've been saying in the media. I think in particular, I want to remind everybody, and Delegate Marshall mentioned this, but I just want to sort of put an exclamation point on it, which is the state's interest, the reason the state is involved in marriage has always been and is because of children. And Delegate Marshall mentioned this, but it has never been about who loves who hangs out with who spends their life with who. The state doesn't care, frankly, about any of that. The purpose of the state's engagement in marriage has been because it is for the best outcome for the child. It's the most stable environment for children. And so when you talk to other folks and they make it sound like it's about the desires of adults, you need to remind them that that's wonderful, that's great, adults can have whatever desires they want, but the state isn't supposed to be involved in endorsing desires of adults. They endorse the marriage for the outcome of children. And a lot of us have maybe friends that aren't so socially conservative, but they'd call themselves maybe more libertarian. And so I often, and I've had this on a lot of radio shows in the last week as we've been dealing with this issue, remind folks sort of the libertarian understanding. You know, people think, oh, we just need the government out of marriage. Maybe you've even had that thought about it. And what we tell people is marriage is actually the way that the government can have the least role in society, because marriage is the stable unit, it's the best guarantee of a limited government. Because when you don't have stable families, that's when you have family fragmentation, and when you have the fallout of all of that, you have the welfare, you have the kids ending up in the justice system and ending up in prison, and we end up with bigger government when marriage is not working, and when government is not supporting and incentivizing and encouraging stable connections between moms and dads. And you'll hear people, go down all sorts of different roads, but you have to remind them that sort of collectively as a society, we've all kind of agreed that fatherlessness is bad. We have collectively made that. You don't hear anybody argue that kids do fine without a dad. We have all these programs to involve fathers. When there's divorces, we're trying to do better at making sure the dad has more custody. There's just all sorts of, we've sort of collectively said that. Even President Obama has all sorts of great statements on fatherlessness. Well, we can't do that on one hand and be consistent, and yet on the other hand create fatherless homes intentionally, literally giving the state stamp of approval on a home with two moms and no dad. And so we want to use these sort of common sense things that people use, points at which people agree with you, to expand and help them see the connection over to marriage. The other thing that comes up is sort of gay adoption, and that keeps coming up now more and more with this marriage issue. And you'll hear, it came up this morning I was on the John Frederick show, and it came up this morning, and it was sort of this concept that if you have a kid in this lesbian home, shouldn't that child have the benefit of their parents getting a marriage license and having that stability? And what they're missing is, again, this whole thing that you can have exceptions to the rule, right? So you can have instances where a single mom does a fantastic job raising a child, but social science collectively is going to say there's still a best outcome for mom and a dad. And what they make it sound like, they're creating a false scenario by making it sound like a child couldn't be adopted by a mom or a dad, and they make it sound like there's all these people on waiting lists. You'll hear this argument, and your friends might even say, well, what about all these kids that are waiting? The first thing is we have a lot of kids in the foster care system where the number one goal is actually reuniting them with their mom and their dad. They just have to have their family get their act back together. They've got issues going on. And the second piece is we got to see last year with Governor McDonnell's administration just what a job the state can do when they actually start paying attention to and pushing adoption. And we actually had a governor who stepped up and said, I'm going to have a goal of getting 1,000 kids out of the foster care system. And guess what? In 1 year, he got 1,000 kids out of the foster care system just by putting a little oomph behind it from the state. It's the belief that we need gay parents to come somehow rescue these children is a false dichotomy that we need to make sure we can comfortably and very carefully and lovingly dismiss. And so I just want to kind of make sure that we have some of these things in our tool belt when we have our conversations, because if the polls are correct that people are growing more and more comfortable with same-sex marriage, I believe that that is happening because we're not effectively doing our job in these conversations, that collectively we need to do a better job in our churches, in our homes, in our neighborhoods, talking to folks. Now, there's also the side of what do we do as the grassroots with regards specifically to this court case. It's very frustrating that we did everything we could from a grassroots perspective, passed an amendment, and now we are left in the hands of the court. There's still a few things that need to be done. The first one is every church should be engaged on this issue. If you are of a faith community, it should be engaged on this. And so it's a matter of talking to your pastor, talking to folks in your church, and making sure folks are aware that this is the reality and helping them understand the connection to religious freedom. People need to understand that there has not been same-sex marriage, and it has not come in places and then come in isolation to religious liberty. It always affects one's ability to hold views convictions that are deeply felt and be able to continue to have those views, whether it's, there's a lot of cases and you can name them off, the photographer that doesn't want to do a gay wedding or the baker that doesn't want to, have to be involved in these ceremonies. All the way up to when you have this, we're going to end up with gay adoption, and then you have Catholic Charities saying, I can no longer do adoption if I'm going to be required to put a child in a home that is counter to Catholic convictions. So you need to remind churches there's a religious liberty impact. And then we want folks, with regards to this Herring situation, we want folks to be engaged specifically with regards to his lawless actions. A couple ways to do that. One, on our website, we've got a petition. You can just go to familyfoundation.org. You'll see a slider right across the top, and there's a petition that you can sign that we will be delivering to his office that makes it clear that we're disappointed in him stepping out. What he did is unprecedented, and the unprecedented part is not simply not defending the Constitution. That has been done before where there's been a law or something that the AG has felt uncomfortable. He didn't appoint special counsel, but more than that, he jumped in opposition to our Constitution.
Yep.
That is unprecedented. He needs to know that that's not acceptable, because no matter your concern about marriage, he could do it on any number of other issues. And so we need to put a stop sign in front of him and say, we don't want to see it again. The other thing that can be done is calling his office, 804-786-2071. He needs to hear it. They need to feel the pressure. His staff, they're lovely people. Don't take it out on the staff, but they need to feel the weight of what their boss is doing, and have that environment where all of a sudden, they're feeling like, gosh, I really would like Herring to keep in line, because that does have an impact. Other thing, ask your legislators to support the budget amendments Delegate Marshall put forward. Have your legislators, basically the message to legislators is do whatever you can to send a message to Herring. Whatever the opportunities that present themselves are. We had the standing bill earlier this year. I don't think we talked about that yet, and I don't want to get into it in too much depth unless somebody has a specific question. But that was a great opportunity. Delegate Marshall's budget amendments are a great opportunity. There may be other opportunities that we're still coming up with as to how legislators can address this. But ask your legislators to step up. And so I think that probably covers it.
Okay.
Mr. Jackson, if you have some questions.
Thank you, Victoria.
EW, this is Daniel. If I may make him a suggestion, if Victoria has time, why don't we go on to Mr. Brown, and then after he finishes, then we can take questions for both of them.
Well, let's ask Victoria. Victoria, do you have time?
Yeah, that's fine. We can do that.
Okay. All right. Let's do it. Brian, you're on.
Thank you, Reverend Jackson. Thanks, everyone, for being on. I am stuck on a delayed train, so hopefully there won't be any noise overhead. Let me just say that this decision on the part of this federal judge is the most recent in a string of decisions in which what we're seeing in our country is simply lawlessness on the part of the courts. In Utah, we saw a federal judge not only do what this judge has done, is rewrite the Constitution, say that the overwhelming majority of voters were the functional equivalent of bigots and racists, and unilaterally overturn the marriage amendment. That judge also refused to grant any stay so that he could get as many same-sex marriages occurring as possible, clearly to muck up the water and make it difficult to restore the law. Now, there have been other judges. The 10th Circuit refused to grant a stay in that case, and in Oklahoma's case. In Nevada, we saw the governor refuse even to fight, a Republican governor, to defend marriage. So what you said in the beginning, Reverend Jackson, about, this is a very difficult spot for our fight is obviously true, and I think there is obviously for all of us, a tendency, given how much we've given in the state fights, what is happening? How can the judges get away with doing this? I also would point to, in a very difficult situation, that there is some hope. One example is the fact that the Supreme Court did grant a stay in the Utah case. That's important because the Supreme Court rarely overturns lesser court decisions when they refuse to grant stays, and when it does so, it has to follow some basic rules. And one of those is that there's some likelihood that the lower court ruling will be overturned by the highest court. It's also important to note that this was not just a decision by Sotomayor. This was referred to the full court, and the full court unanimously decided to grant a stay on the decision pending further review. Why is that important? Well, because given what's happened in Virginia with the Attorney General refusing to defend the law, that case may not there's a question as to what case will reach the court first and whether the cases that reach the court will be somehow merged together. In Virginia, obviously, we don't have the Commonwealth defending its own law. In fact, it's on the other side. But it's important because in Utah, the new Attorney General, Sean Reyes, has done an amazing job. I encourage you to read their brief to both the Supreme Court and to the 10th Circuit defending their law. It is excellent. And so I am hopeful that the Utah case will get to the Supreme Court, perhaps connected to the Virginia case, and you will have the state making the strongest arguments possible at the Supreme Court. Having said all that, obviously none of us want to be in a position where we're hoping and praying that the Supreme Court does the right thing, given what it did in the earlier Windsor decision in making a very bad decision there, and as Delegate Marshall laid out, refusing to recognize that the federal government has legislated on marriage before. It did so in the Utah Enabling Act, allowing Utah to become a state. All of these specifics are important because the court is simply making up its own history, making up its laws as it goes along, and ignoring clear facts. For example, that the federal government has legislated on marriage before. It has not only been the purview of the state. So where do we go from here? Well, number one, there are basically 5 points I want to quickly make, because there's going to be, and there is, a strong push for religious liberty protections, because many people see or believe that somehow we're going to eventually lose at the Supreme Court, so we should try and get what we can get in religious liberty protections. NOM supports religious liberty protections, but we're under no illusion that somehow they solve the problem. If we lose marriage, if the courts can redefine marriage, then they can just strip away religious liberty protections. So we need, as hard as it is, as difficult as the situation is, to fight it with all of our strength. And frankly, we need heroes. As Christians, we've been down before. It's looked bad. And during the Civil Rights Movement, during the fight against slavery in England, time and time again, folks have stood up and said no, and have been willing to do what many think is impossible. So there are 5 real ways that are sort of end game for the marriage movement, that as difficult as they are to conceive that we may be able to do them, would be the things that would stop even if the Supreme Court was to move forward in redefining marriage. One is the federal marriage amendment. In Congress, there are currently over 60 sponsors of a federal marriage amendment that would protect marriage throughout the country. Folks need to contact their congressmen and get them to support that. We also need to be at the point where we no longer accept from the leadership in the party that we're not going to get a hearing on bills like the federal marriage amendment. We need to push Boehner and make clear we want a hearing, and if he's not going to allow a hearing, we need a leadership change. Number 2, there are a number of bills, including the State Marriage Defense Act, that would protect states from having to being forced to recognize same-sex marriages and stop the federal government from doing what Obama and Holder are doing, which is essentially rewriting the law to accept same-sex marriages wherever folks live, not where the same-sex marriages occurred. Not where they occurred. Senator Cruz and Senator Lee just introduced this last week. It's really important that we've got some leadership there, because many are working within the Republican Party to tear it away from supporting traditional marriage, including big donors. Number 3 is the idea of an Article 5 convention, where you get states that currently have protected marriage in their constitutions to say enough is enough. We're not going to allow the federal courts to ram this down our throats. We are going to, through our legislatures, call for a state constitutional amendment. These have been called before. On life, 28 states have supported these. This would also put pressure on the court to not redefine marriage. As many of you know, the court decision said that Scalia said that the court will get away with what the court thinks it can get away with. We need massive opposition in any way we can. Sorry for the background noise. I am stuck on this train.
That's okay. That's okay, Brian. Go right ahead.
Number 3, we have a March for Marriage. We had one last year. Many of you were there. We had about 10,000 folks there. We want to get 50,000 folks out in front of the Supreme Court, out in front of Congress. This year it will happen June 19th, and I hope that everyone can attend and be a part of this. We need to make a bold public statement that the country is not going to stand for this.
I assume, Brian, that will be in the morning?
That will be 11.
At 11 o'clock. Okay. All right. I will be there.
Good. And we're going to ask you to speak.
Thank you. I'm happy to.
Number 4, again, we're at a Lincoln-type moment. We cannot just simply throw up our hands on something as important as marriage. Even if folks feel depressed or frustrated, we have an obligation to stand and fight for God's truth about marriage. And that means that this lawlessness has to stop. And if it means that, like Lincoln had to say that Dred Scott was not going to enforce, we need to support governors that are willing to say, if the Supreme Court does this, we simply are not going to implement it. We're at the point of civil disobedience against unjust laws. And again, we support that. Some folks say, well, that's too extreme. Well, we've got courts that are making up the Constitution as they go. We need to stand up firmly against that. And number 5, regardless of whether you know the best arguments, again, we've got talking points on our website, Victoria does. We need heroes. It is a time for heroes, and that means not being afraid in your workplace, not being afraid wherever you are, to boldly and lovingly proclaim the truth that there is a difference between a man and woman coming together in marriage, that this is a beautiful truth, children do best with a mom and a dad, and that you are going to stand for it, and you are not going to be intimidated out of speaking up for it.
Amen.
So, thank you.
Excellent.
Well, thank you, Brian. Listen, we've got to get both of you back on again, and obviously Delegate Marshall too, because this is more than we've been able to handle in the time we've had.